In 2002, a band from New Jersey released one of the most bizarre brutal death metal albums ever recorded. They were only around for a couple years, and then completely disappeared. With no follow-up, no evolution, for over 20 years there was nothing. Until suddenly, they came back. This is the story of Dripping. Dripping is a band I feel like anyone who's into underground brutal death metal, underground slam, extreme metal in general, it's one of those names that I feel like most people have just come by, or at least have heard of this band. And they're a really unique project, and I'm making this video because there's no retrospective of them on YouTube. There's no like video really deep diving kind of the band's history and stuff. And I thought it would be cool to kind of give like the story of Dripping and how they came to be and their legacy up to now as well. So as many people know, before Dripping, there was a band called Cadaverment, and this band was based in New Jersey. What some people don't know though is that before Cadaverment, there was another band called Drowning Blood that Seb, who is one of the two founding members of Dripping, originally had as a name. He then met the other founding member, whose name is Bruce Molam, the drummer and vocalist on Dripping's one and only album that we are going to get to a bit later. Seb and Bruce met, they jammed, and they wanted to play some more brutal stuff, so Drowning Blood turned into Cadaverment. Drowning Blood has no demos or anything out. It was just kind of a name. I believe they jammed and they played a couple shows, something like that. But there's virtually nothing you could find of them online. This is just verbatim from Seb. Before we start talking about the actual band itself, I do want to talk a bit about kind of the scene and the influences that Cadaverment and Dripping took throughout their lifespan. They were obviously based in the New Jersey, New York area. So there was a lot of mixed influences because they did come about in the late 90s. Cadaverment was 1999. So death metal had already kind of passed its course. Things were getting more experimental. There was brutal death metal, slam, all that stuff had already happened. So they mixed a lot of influences. You know, you had stuff like demonacy, immolation, suffocation, dehumanized, mortician, internal bleeding, disfigured, all those New Jersey bands. Mortal Decay was a huge one. Ripping Corpse is a huge one. And they mixed some other influences too, even outside of metal. You had some hardcore influence, bands like Irate, even some more metalcore leaning stuff like Burnt by the Sun. Candiria, I know Seb was a huge fan of. And then you also had some more like hip hop and even electronic music influences on the album, which we will get to later. So let's talk a bit about Cadaverment. This band formed in 1999 in Clifton, New Jersey, if I'm not mistaken. Once again by Sebastian Russo and Bruce Molam. They would also have a friend named Tom Kiefer who would play bass in Cadaverment, and he would also last all the way up until the Dripping days. That was kind of like the trinity of Dripping. It was those three people that were the consistent lineup. They were going for a more unique style. You know, what they did, not many other people did. They're trying to do something more brutal, more experimental, just mixing all of their influences. And they did make something that I believe almost no other band sound like. Cadaverment would only have 2 demos. One of them is the Bring the Suffering demo that they're most known for. That one was 1999. And they did have a second demo too that is sometimes titled Shadows of Eternal Sickness. But yeah, they had a very small output. It was a pretty short-lived band. You know, they jammed, they played a bit, and they also had a vocalist. He didn't make it to the Dripping days, but his name was Joe Lorenz, if I'm not mistaken. Here's a picture of Seb writing some stuff for Cadaverment when he was fresh out of jail on probation. They were pretty young writing this stuff too. I think they were around 19 years old, something like that. Eventually though, they did want to push the boundaries more of being extreme and of being experimental, and they kind of had a rebirth. They wanted to change the Cadaverment name, and in 2000 is when Dripping was born. So, year 2000, Cadaverment now becomes Dripping. Once again, they wanted to change the style. They parted ways with Joe, the original vocalist. He was more of like some say hardcore, more of that like gruff kind of growly vocal technique. And they wanted something more guttural, a deeper voice. You know, they were listening I know big Cadaverment fans at the time, just kind of stuff like that, the very deep vocal. Dripping would release 2 demos as well before their album, which is their kind of crowning work that we will talk about. They had a demo 2000 and promo 2001 that would kind of showcase the evolution in style. So they took the Cadaverment formula and it became just weirder. It became more abstract, more focused on kind of the slam parts and a lot of weird like grindy parts. Bruce specifically has this really weird blast, and if you look up videos, there's one video of Dripping playing live. It was this really cool show with Vomit Remnants, Brodican, and Morg in the very early time of Dripping. But he does this crazy gravity blast, and I've never seen a technique like that before. It's really weird. He's like super far from the drum set and like snapping his wrist. I'm a drummer, so when I'm seeing that, it's like, what the hell is this guy doing? It's very, very unique, and it's part of their sound. Dripping's lineup too would have some variations, which it has even after their comeback, but we'll get to that a bit later. The original days though, they cycled through a few different members, with the 3 constant ones being Seb on guitar, Bruce on drums, and Tom on bass. So they had an alternate rhythm guitarist that was named Jerry. He was part of, I believe, one of the demos, but they parted ways with him and it became a 3-piece again. And funny enough, Bruce, the drummer, was actually handling all the gutturals. I feel like they just couldn't find like someone who could really do them the way that they really had in mind. For live, they would end up getting some people though. They first had a vocalist named Frank Bleakley, their friend. He played in some bands like Carry On, Unhallowed, and Comatose Rust. So he was on vocal duties for a bit, but eventually they parted ways with him and they got a new vocalist. His name was Gabe Abatengelo. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. And they even had a rhythm guitarist, Mike Connors, that they had in the band for some time. But once again, they parted ways with these people. So after some time, as Dripping's career kind of went on, they were gearing up to record their LP, which once again, we're gonna get to in a second because I got a lot to say about that. It's a really weird record for anyone who hasn't heard it. I don't think there's any brutal death metal that really kind of hit the mark that they did with Disintegration of Thought Patterns. Before that came out, they put out a self-released EP called The Lost Archives of Channeling Expeditions Through the Cosmos. And what's interesting is that all of the songs on that EP do appear on the album, just with different samples. And on this Lost Archives EP is when they started doing the crazy sample usage. If you go listen to the demos, you know, it's pretty raw. It's instruments, vocals. It's like a just metal demo. It's still brutal and weird. But on the Lost Archives, they started putting a bunch of samples in the song. So you have electronic samples. They took like this trance song, which is actually why it's not on streaming, because I believe they keep getting copyright hit because of this track. It's called like I Feel Wonderful. It's a good track, but they have that in the song Skydiving Through the Hemisphere. They have like a kind of mariachi style sample, acoustic guitar, and stuff from like other music and even movies. They would use this a lot on Disintegration. So then after that is when we get to the star of the show, Disintegration of Thought Patterns Through a Synthetic Mind Traveling Bliss, their current one and only album, and what I think is one of the coolest brutal death metal albums just in general. It's a very sick release. It's a very, I guess, psychedelic album is a good way to describe it, because it's mixing not just the super grindy brutal death metal with slam. You also have hip hop samples, you have electronic samples, other types of experimental music. I know Seb and Bruce, they were into a lot of stuff, and it just kind of all just blended together to make this record, and that is why it's so unique. It was really ahead of its time, and I don't think it had ever been done before, and I think even today, no one has really replicated it. There are some similar bands, you know. I know there's Genova Virus from Japan, and funny enough, one of the current members of Dripping has a project called Vacant Moly that's kind of similar kind of style, like very weird sample heavy experimental brutal death metal. This would also be their only, or not their only release, this would be their first release on a label. So they signed a deal with Macabre Mementos, which was a Japanese brutal death metal label. They put out a bunch of heavy hitters back in the day. They had Gorgasm, Internal Suffering, Vomit Remnants, Wormed, and Digested Flesh, amongst a few others. And the sound of the album too, it's very raw. I'm a fan of it. It's funny because Seb, the guitarist, has said that this was not how it was supposed to sound. Like it was kind of like unsatisfied because of they had limited time, they had a limited budget. So I'm very curious what it would have sounded like if they kind of had free reign over recording, because apparently there was multiple melodies or harmonies and stuff that weren't included or were left out. Some gear nerd facts during the recording of this album. So all the guitar tracks are recorded on a Marshall VS100 amp, which is actually what I got right here. It's a good old school amp. It's budget, but you know, it has a sick sound. The contour knob cranked on it, and I believe it was into a Hartke or Hartke, I'm probably butchering that, bass cabinet surrounded by a wooden box to capture resonance. So that's kind of interesting story how they got the sound on that album. But yeah, like I mentioned before, it was a very uncertain release. They had all the material on here that wasn't already kind of in the vault from the demos and from archives. All the final tracks were written and recorded very quickly. I believe it was like 2 weeks that they composed the rest of it, and they had the budget constraints in the studio. So this was the final product of all their efforts, but it wasn't the exact final vision that I think it was supposed to be. So I'm gonna read this verbatim from the Dripping Last FM bio that is written by the band's own account. I'll link that in the description if anyone wants to read through. It's kind of like a condensed history of the band before the comeback. But it says right here, during the next month or two, we were trying to finish up some songs for the debut album, but we were struggling with what we wanted to do musically on the album. Everyone was going in different directions, and we just didn't know how we wanted the album to sound. We finally came to a collective decision to record the album as a 3-piece with the original lineup. We didn't want any barriers and to bring all our influences into the music, no matter what they were. Sebastian would handle all guitars and backing vocals, Tom on bass and backing vocals, Bruce on drums, guttural vocals, spoken words and lyrics, and our good friend Mario Comesanas from December would guest appear and do all the high shriek vocals. We wrote the album within 2 weeks and hit the studio. We didn't take much time to review anything. Whatever we did in those 2 weeks was what we would record. Actually, the first time we ever heard Mario on our songs was while he was recording. In the studio, we all came to the decision that this would be our last effort we would do together. We wanted to record something that didn't follow any rules, something that expressed everything we were into, whether it be hip-hop, jazz, death metal, classical, trance, pop, whatever. We did it without any fear of who would like it or not. We didn't care if the label or fans hated it. We wanted to flip their idea of what they thought death metal was supposed to be. After the recording, Dripping soon disbanded. So that was kind of the story of Disintegration of Thought Patterns, and forgot to mention earlier, but it came out in 2002, so that was kind of like the last year of Dripping as a band. And by the time they had recorded, the band was basically done. It was just a matter of recording it and then dissolving. So they parted ways after this. They went their separate ways. Seb seemed to phase out of metal completely. He was actually involved in underground rap hip-hop scene for a good number of years afterwards. And Bruce and Tom would continue with kind of being into metal and brutal stuff. Bruce and Tom would have a brief stint in a pretty underrated and sick-ass death metal project called Parasitoid. They only released one promo, were only around for like 1 or 2 years. It was just a 2005 promo. But that's really sick stuff for anyone who wants to hear Bruce's drumming and involvement in something after Dripping. So this brings us to kind of the next part, which is the legacy of Dripping and the comeback. So Dripping did disappear for almost 2 whole decades. That's a long time, and they were a pretty underground band, but they did stay relevant, and they did gain a cult status, which is how they kind of just stayed relevant in the underground. You know, I feel like when I first found Dripping, I think I was 15 or 16. I found it on YouTube in like 2020, and it was had this whole mystique. You know, it was this experimental, unique, brutal death metal band, and I mean, it delivers. I think it's fantastic. But there were people who did keep the torch lit for Dripping, and I do think they obviously need a shout out. So I think two main ones off the top of my head are Dripping's New Jersey friends, Roy from Necroharmonic and Gutter Christ, who does Gutter Christ Productions. He books shows and kind of has his own label and stuff. So the first Dripping reissue was by the Necroharmonic label. It was a compilation called Bring the Suffering in 2005, and it was repressed again in 2018, I believe. But this had the Dripping and Cadaverment demos all on one disc, with a bunch of like cool pictures from Dripping's past. I think that was the first like proper reissue of the band's material. And then the Disintegration of Thought Patterns album was reissued in 2014 and 2016 by Gutter Christ Productions. So this here is the vinyl press. This is not the original cover. The original cover is way cooler in my opinion. This was kind of like a remaking of it by Gutter Christ. That's Mario, who did the highs, rest in peace. He played in the band December Aeternalis. Seb was also involved in that band I think even before Dripping. They were kind of like a more chaotic metalcore band. And then more recently, Dissonant Tapes has repressed the Lost Archives EP and Disintegration of Thought Patterns in the 2020s on, I think, all formats. So now we get to The Return. It's really interesting when these bands come back. It doesn't happen often, you know. There's a lot of cult classic bands that I feel like they're gone and they're just buried forever, you know. They'll be remembered forever in underground metal, but they don't come back. You have bands like Infestor, Gorement, Time Ghoul, you know, those big names in underground where it's like they got their represses, they got their modern relevancy, but they never come back, you know. They just kind of stay as a archive. In 2023 though, Dripping did make a comeback. So crazy moment. I don't think anyone was expecting that to happen. But how this came to be is a whole kind of story in itself. So Seb, he was, I think, moving around the Northeast after Dripping, and he did move to Florida at one point. I believe at 2019, he fully relocated here in Florida, where he currently lives. And in 2023, yeah, the name was brought back. Seb kind of revived the band. Yeah, Seb brought the band back with a young lineup of people all from here in South Florida. And the lineup has already shifted a bunch of times since 2023. Half their current members are in the Northeast. You could go check the Metalum. I'll link that in the description too, but there's been like 4 or 5 lineup changes, maybe 3 or 4, with the only member staying consistent from the initial kind of reincarnation of Dripping is Ed. He's my boy, and he's a fantastic guitarist. It's super cool for a band like that to come back and be local to me. I never would have thought that would have happened, honestly. Bruce, on the other hand, is completely kind of removed from the Dripping name. You know, Seb's the only OG member kind of involved in this revival. Bruce, he went on to make dark ambient music. So he has a project called God Body Disconnect. Make sure to go check that out too. And he contributes to this kind of collective called the Underwater Sleep Orchestra. So I don't think he's really involved in metal much these days anymore, but he's kind of an enigma. He has a pretty like mysterious history. I would love to do like an interview with him or something one day. Let's reel it back in for a second though. So Modern Dripping, they've put out 2 releases since the comeback, and the comeback kind of happened with their debut set. It was at New Jersey Death Fest. They played Disintegration in full. Pretty sick moment. It was probably surreal. I wish I could have been there. That was probably such an awesome show to see. You know, to see a band like that play that music is very crazy, you know. It was so weird and so experimental. It just felt like one of those like internet oddities that's just meant to forever stay on the internet. But they came back and they played all of it, so pretty sick. And they also played this past Maryland Death Fest. Pretty awesome. I think they played the same day as Devourment. Another thing I missed that I'm like kicking myself for. But there are two releases. So the first one, they had dropped like a single, but it was followed up by the EP Archaic Scriptures of Epistemology. Maggot Stomp put that out. That was last year in 2025. And then they were part of the Limb Splitter 3 compilation from Ossuary Industries. They did a couple of those back in the day too, some pretty sick comps. But this one had Dripping along with, god damn it, I gotta pull this up. It was Dripping with Sect of Execration, Fire Band, Malthusia demo, one of the best brutal death metal demos ever. That's pre-Sect of Execration for anyone who wants to go check it out. And Fisted, Brutal Torment were the other two bands on the Limb Splitter. But yeah, that brings us to where we are now. So Dripping is kind of back and rolling. You know, they're playing shows. They played a good amount in the Northeast. They played a handful of times in Florida. They did a run recently with a couple Florida bands, Fragmentation and Hacksaw. Make sure to check those bands out too. And this is kind of the story of Dripping, minus a few details that I'm probably forgetting. There's also one more reissue that I did with my own label, Crow's Nest Records. It was kind of like an archival DVD compilation with 2 CDs, just a remaster of the Disintegration album with a 1 track that was recorded at the time of the record, but it was never put out. So never been heard before. It's up on Bandcamp and stuff. I'll put the link down there, or you could buy the CD if there's any left by the time this video goes up. And then the side B has a alternate mix / recording of Disintegration, which is really interesting to hear. There's like some slightly different guitar parts, and it has no samples, so it's an interesting kind of variation on the album. And there's also a bonus track with Tom on vocals, a garage demo that has also never been released. So anyone interested, kind of like to dig into collector stuff if you're a fan of Dripping, or if this is your first time hearing about them, make sure to go check that out. I spent a while working on it. I think it's a pretty damn sick release. And also thank you guys for watching this video. This is the first video on this channel. I'm going to try to do a lot more retrospectives, just kind of deep diving into underground bands, like cool stuff in metal, and doing some interviews. There will be a Dripping interview coming soon with Seb and Ed, 2 of the current members, including Seb, one of the founding members. And hopefully one day we could get Bruce on too. That would be really, really interesting to kind of get his side, since he's been very, very quiet, or kind of out the picture for many years now. Make sure to drop in the comments, what's the weirdest brutal death metal band to you guys? Or just the weirdest metal band in general, whatever experimental stuff. Hit up the comments with some recommendations. Thank you guys, and see you next time.